Okay, hello there for you folks. This little video is just to remind you about functions and procedures, collectively called methods in Java, of course. Remember, a function is a method that returns something back to wherever it was called from, and a procedure doesn't. So I've attached some code, and yours won't look exactly like mine, but hopefully uh, there's some points I want to make at the end here. This first get points um, method, it is a function, and I can tell that it's a function right away for two ways. One is that it's going to return a type of integer array, and at the end there's a return command, and so wherever um, this function gets called, it's going to um, return that array. And we can see if we skip ahead to the main, it actually gets called there. There's where it gets called, and it gets assigned into this integer array here. And I'll talk about the variables in a second. Second one, let's see. Notice that this one here didn't take any parameters. There were no inputs. The inputs actually came from the keyboard, and the output was the array. In this one, though, what it did is it read in four different integers, the x and y coordinates of 2 points, and then calculated, this is just the distance between 2 points formula, and returned it. Notice this is a short and sweet one, maybe not the best programming style because it's kind of hard to follow. There's no comments there. But it read in those four numbers and outputted a single double. A single double, that's funny. A single real number. So notice that once we got those points, what this function call did, this method call, used those array elements to ask it to calculate the side, and then so side A was the output there, and that was done a few times there. And notice that once it calc side did its thing, calc side up here did its thing, it returned the length of that side, which was a decimal number, a double. And it did that a few times, and then it asked it to print area. Now notice how this looks different, right? This method call was assigned to a new variable. A method call assigned to a new variable. There's another way to see that it's a function, where this one here, this print area, takes it has three parameters, but it doesn't return anything. So this must be a procedure, and indeed it does. It takes three parameters and does stuff. And this actually calculates the area of the triangle given the three sides, and it doesn't return anything. That means it's a procedure. And right there, it has the word void. So when you see the word void, that means a procedure. Nothing is returned. Okay, dandy. Now, a few other notes about this. First of all, the scope of the variables. Notice that there was a weird thing going on here. When I called, let's look at this line right here. When I called this, it was called point zero. These were elements of an array that I was calling. But then when it came into the calc side, it was called x1 and y1 and x2 and y2. Well, these variable names x1 are local to here. If I were to actually try and print out x1 out here, watch what will happen. Print line x1, it's given me an error here. Well, it's given me a couple errors because I didn't. Right here it says cannot be resolved into a variable. It doesn't know what x1 is. That's because in the scope that it's in, this main method, the main method, there's no x1. x1, its scope is just right here. If I had system out in here, dot out, and I'm not going to run this because it takes forever to actually boot up, x1, it would do it. It would just print out the first value that it inputted, whatever the first element in the array would be the first time we called that. Dandy. So this is the idea of local variables. Local variables have the scope just relative in their own little method there. And I want to mention something here. In this case, in the main method, we called it points, and get points went up to get points here. And just by coincidence, and this isn't poor programming practice because we were thinking of these variables being local to their local scope. This points array occurs only in here. And so even though I use the same name in the main method, Java is going to be able to keep this straight. It knows that this array isn't necessarily the same array as this array, because local here, this points is local here, and this points is local here. Good programming style, where we can pay attention to scope. I also want to make a mention about what a global variable is. So for instance, if we got lazy and forgot about this parameter passing and had poor programming habits, we might make the array static int whatever at the start. This is a global variable, and this is bad, and I'll tell you why in a second. It's because that if somehow I had in one of my procedures here a whatev, and notice I've printed out somewhere in one of these, I printed out whatev, but let's say my calculation used the variable name whatev. I could be changing a global variable when I actually only wanted a local variable. So this is actually very, very poor, see the sad face there, programming practices. So we want to not use global variables as much as we can. And I think that's one of the points I made. Think about variable scope. Global variable is bad. Instead, what we should be doing is parameter passing. The idea of if I need something from one method to another, I should be passing it back and forth. It shouldn't necessarily be a global variable. And local to the main method, fine, and then I'll pass it back and forth to my methods. That's dandy. But these global variables are a bad idea just because, well, notice that if I wanted to, let's say if I wanted to, this happened to be a pretty nice method, and I want to use this again in some other program. Phone's ringing. Just a second. I gotta pause. All right, I'm back. I've forgotten what I was saying though. Oh, one of the good things about using local variables and versus global variables, if I grab this and put this in another program, this whatev, it doesn't mean anything. It's a global to this program, but if I use this method, since it's all local variables, local, I can reuse this code. So reusable code, that's a good thing, right? We don't want to have these global variables because then our code is less usable, reusable, and we can avoid unintended errors. One last point, and I know this video is getting long. You want to get back at whatever you're doing. What's this deal with the static? Static. Well, we're getting close to this, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself because this has got to do with object-oriented stuff. For instance, if I were to put, and I did this up here. It's not on your code, but I put in what looks like a global variable. It looks like a global variable, but what it is, it's a variable of this class. So remember we talked about classes as being a template or a blueprint to make objects. Well, this is one of the variables. So we've decided that a warm up day 4 has a crud, not a bicycle has 2 tires and a handlebar or whatever, but a warm up day 4 has an integer crud, and it happens to be equal to 89, and we've set it there. Um, and then if I wanted to actually get access to those variables, then what I would need to do is create a new object. This object, little w, little u, little d, 4, is now a warm-up day 4 object. And as soon as I do that, then I'm going to comment this out. Then I'd have access to this variable of the object WUD4. And if I printed this off, you can see it's not going to have any errors because it's working out fine. And if I were to run this, shall I run it? Yes, I shall. Oh, I got to put in I got to go through the triangle thing. You guys have probably done this, but I'll go through the triangle thing real fast. It's not what I'm interested in. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. There. And notice this was the me messing around with the global variable whatever, and I had a print line whatever there. Global variable's bad, but now notice this object variable, the variable crud of the object WD4 also printed. And this is getting into the idea of objects and classes versus global stuff. And we can just imagine what then the methods would look like if we talked about running methods for an object. So for instance here, all of a sudden now it said cannot make a static reference to the non-static method. Now we were taught to get access to this, we'd have to make an object. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but have a look at this. Print area, and if I actually had that, and it's actually asking me what I would like to fill in, that's kind of nice. B and C, and suddenly it would work. Because now I've made an object, it's not a static method, it's a method that goes with the object WD4. Now, of course, I got an error up here, but I'm not worried about that. All right, a little more that I wanted to say. I wanted to, hopefully you remembered about functions and procedures, and this also gave you a little code to remind you about arrays. So have fun with that, and on to your review.